My name is Laura Stoner, and I am here with Susan McLean, and we are here on July 31st, 2023 on StreamYard talking about her experience serving with the American Red Cross as a Donut Dolly in the Vietnam War. So welcome to the interview.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So can you tell me your full name?
I go by Susan Bradshaw McLean when I'm talking about Vietnam because the people in Vietnam knew me as Susan Bradshaw, my maiden name. But
And
now it's just Susan McLean unless I'm talking about Vietnam.
And what year were you born?
I was born in 1948.
And where were you born?
I was born in a little tiny town in Virginia called Pearisburg, Pearis, Pearisburg, Virginia.
And what were your parents like? Did they have jobs? What did they do in Pearisburg?
Well, my mother was a typical homemaker, and my father was getting into working with Amico Gas, but then he went into the war, so he didn't do that until afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any siblings?
I had an older brother. He was 3 years older, went to Virginia Tech, and they thought he'd be the one going to Vietnam, and he got stationed in Germany instead. And then I have a sister 9 years younger than I.
And where did you go to high school?
Richmond, Virginia. I went to one of the second class to ever graduate from the new high school, John Randolph Tucker High School.
Oh, so your family eventually moved to Richmond?
Yeah, Richmond. Lived in Fredericksburg prior to Richmond, and I lived in Williamsburg after I got married. So yeah, lots of different
Virginia
routes.
Yeah. And when you graduated from high school, what year was that?
66.
And what were your plans?
Straight to Longwood to be a teacher. Back in those days, you could be a teacher, secretary, or a nurse. So I went to Longwood College to be a teacher.
Did you know what subject you wanted to teach or what grade?
No. Even graduated, I didn't. I still didn't. So no.
So you finished up at Longwood in 4 years. So that would have been 70.
June of 70 was graduation. My parents had since moved back to Asheville, North Carolina. So I went to Asheville for about 3 weeks and then headed to Washington, D.C. for training.
Well, when did you first hear about Donut Dollies?
We were Kennedy kids, so we were always looking for something to do for our country, and I didn't know what I could do. I was thinking about Volunteers in Service to America, the VISTA program. I was going to go teach backwoods of mountains of North Carolina or something. But I had a friend that had been to Vietnam, and he said, if you really want to do something worthwhile, you should be a donut dolly. And I'd never heard of it prior to that.
And we should back up a bit. And you told me you have a picture that you have sent to us that features you in an American Junior Red Cross uniform.
Yeah, I was about 8 or 9 years old, and we used to, for volunteer work, we would take blood bottles and we would then get 2 extra vials and we put it on the outside of the blood bottle and put a rubber band around it and then stack them in cartons to ship or something. But that was I think I was like 9 years old or something, 8, 9, something in there. Pretty young, but I thought it was funny that I had a Red Cross history.
So did they come to Longwood to recruit you, or did you just?
Once I heard about it, I started looking into it, and I think I went to Charlotte, North Carolina to talk to a girl who had done it. And in the meantime, my college had taken me on a trip to Europe the summer of '69, and I'd had a chance to see what it was like to be in a communist country because we got to go across Checkpoint Charlie and be in East Berlin. So once you've been in a communist country, it kind of gives you that much more of an urge to do whatever you can to fight communism and
Mhm.
be a nurse. So I didn't know there was any other way I could get to Vietnam until I found out about it's called the Supplemental Recreational Activities Overseas Program. That's why the boys called us Donut Dollies, because supplemental recreational activities overseas was a little much for them.
And so you signed up for the program, and was that an application process, or did you?
Yeah, it was the beginning of my senior year, and I knew you had to be a college graduate, but they spend a lot of time going way back. They went all the way back to my first grade teacher and every job I'd ever had, summer jobs and stuff, with background checks, because we had a pretty good security clearance, because people would tell us things they shouldn't tell us, and we would see things that we needed a good security clearance for.
And you so then they accepted you into the program, and then you had to go to DC for training?
Right, all the classes would go stay in a hotel in DC, and then we had about 2 weeks, I think it was, of training, and that was to help us learn more of the Army slang than anything else, so we know the difference between a B-52 and a P-38 and a general and a sergeant and a division and a platoon, and it was a lot of learning military, what a Connex is, what just stuff like that. That's a whole different world for the military. So we didn't know that get trained that much in our job, because every place in Vietnam was so entirely different that every time we'd ask them a question, they'd say, well, it depends and it varies, and about where you're stationed. And that was so true, because some of the girls would stay in an air conditioned recreational hall where they had paid helpers to clean up and make the Kool-Aid and stuff. And other girls were flying out in the middle of the jungle. And, so it really did depend on which kind of an assignment you got. So we really had no idea what we were doing, because every question was answered. It depends and it varies.
Hmm. How was your how many people were in your class?
I think there were 26 of us.
And was that an integrated class? Would like, were there Black women
Yeah,
in that training group?
we had, but it was predominantly the girl next door, white girl, but we did have several different ethnic groups. My first assignment, my boss was a beautiful Black woman. And so, there were not many, but they tried hard to um, hit
Recruit them.
different groups.
Hmm. And did you it, did you enjoy being in DC? Did you all do anything
No,
fun? No.
no, it was long, boring days of, like I said, military stuff. And yeah, it was pretty long and pretty boring.
And so you left for Vietnam in 1970.
Yes.
Do you know what
We
month?
flew from DC to Travis Air Force Base, or we were in California. We were to leave from Travis Air Force Base, and there was a problem. About half of the class got to go first, and we arrived in Saigon on August the 3rd of 1970. And then we had to wait till the other half of the class could get there. So we had a little time to be tourists and acclimate to the weather and try to rest and wait for the other girls to show up, so that we could do a few days of cultural in-country training. A
Hmm.
little bit more about the Vietnamese and culture and this and that for a couple of days. And then they passed out our assignments and we split up and were sent all over the country.
So you had been to Europe before you came to Vietnam, but
Right.
was this your first time traveling to Asia?
Oh, yeah. And it was quite a shock. Quite a shock. We thought, since we'd been all over Europe, that we thought we were world travelers, but we were in for quite a shock. We knew it too. As soon as they opened the door of the airplane, we went, okay, think I should have listened to my mom on this one. Not, this is different, different from anything we'd ever experienced.
Was it just the heat and the humidity, or
Smell was, Saigon is a city in 1970 that was built for like 2 million people, and they had 4 million. So they had people sleeping on the sidewalks, and the bathrooms or the sidewalks, and the smell of that and the heat, it's a smell you'll never forget.
so so your first impression was that kind
Was
of.
was like, oh dear,
Mhm.
this might not have been such a good idea after all.
How did your mom feel about you going in the
My
pregnancy?
parents were absolutely horrified. Horrified. My dad was in World War II, and he could not get over the fact that the Red Cross charged him a nickel for a donut. And if he had taken the time to research it, he would have found out that that was a government mandated thing that they had to do. They had to charge. The government said they had to charge, but there's still people that are going to their graves, Red Cross for paying that nickel. Um, he was just horrified. And my mother, our job as young women in that decade were to go to college, get married, and have kids. That was it. That was your total purpose in life, was um, procreating. So my mother was so embarrassed that she didn't tell. Most people didn't know. And when you disappeared for a year back in those days, you were having a baby somewhere. And she would rather people think that than to think that I volunteered to head to the jungle.
So they didn't see it as a patriotic
No,
duty that
n-
you were performing.
no. And they were so excited when my brother, because he owed 4 years being a Virginia Tech graduate, and they were just sure he was going to Vietnam. And luckily, he got the 4-year assignment in Germany. So they thought the war was over for them. They didn't realize that the thought never even occurred to them that their daughter might be going. So they weren't happy first.
Do you think that if you could have enlisted in the military, that you would have done that if that was an option for a woman at that time?
Probably not. Probably not. I would have just gone ahead and been a teacher. I really wanted to volunteer what I thought was a worthwhile service. So I don't think I would have joined. I think it had to be a volunteer feeling like I was accomplishing some volunteer service.
Mhm.
Kennedy really got us, get serve your country. So
So was it hard to go over there knowing that your parents weren't quite excited about what you were doing, or they didn't wanna talk to anybody about what you were doing?
no, I really was so focused on what I was doing. Um, and bless their hearts, they really did have a rough time. I'll give them that. Because 13 days after we got in country, my father's secretary, she knew that I was gone, came in and said, "How's Susan?" And he went, "What do you mean, how's Susan?" I haven't heard from her. She's only been there 13 days. And he said his secretary turned pale, and he said, "What do you know that I don't know?" And he said, "Well," she said, Paul Harvey, the good old Paul Harvey, announced on the radio as I was coming to work that a Red Cross worker who'd been in country 13 days was murdered,
Mm.
that they were withholding her name until they could notify kin. So my poor parents, had to go through that, waiting to see if it was me, trying to call the Red Cross to see if it was me, and knowing that even if it wasn't me, that it was one of my 25 new sisters kind of thing. So they knew, and they had come to DC when I left, and they had met everybody and gone to dinner with everybody and the parents that did show up. And, so they had met Jenny and they had met her parents and stuff. So it was tough. It was a tough one for them.
And
And
she was the one who was killed by a soldier.
yeah, he was murdered by a soldier.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was really 3 days after we got our assignments, because part of that 13 days we were in DC training, and then we got our assignments and I went north to Ankei and she went south to Kuchi, and 3 days later she was murdered.
Yeah, that's a hard.
Yeah. And then the Red Cross gave us the option, gave us a week to think about it. And if we wanted to go home, we could at their expense, because before, if you quit, you had to pay your own way home, which I'll never forget. One-way ticket back in 1970 was $1,100. And so they said they would send us home if we were that frightened and we needed to go home. But if you quit after that, you were on your own flight home. So,
Do you know if anybody from your class took up
oh
the
yeah,
offer?
quite a few of the girls, left. Not just our class, any of the girls that were in country could leave.
But I felt like I read somewhere that there were only like 3 Donut Dollies that maybe had like that either died or were
Yeah.
injured. Like it was a very low proportion of. I'm
Yeah,
sure you all faced a lot of danger, but there was a low proportion that actually happened, right?
3 out of 627, and a lot of those girls didn't stay. So we're not really sure how many stayed the year. We count 4. There was a 4th girl that died that had been a Donut Dolly and chose to stay at the end of her tour, and she was killed in Operation Baby Lift.
Oh yeah.
So the Red Cross will not count her as one of theirs, but in my mind, she wouldn't have been there if she hadn't have been a Donut Dolly. So the fact that she stayed to help Operation Baby Lift and was killed in the plane crash, she's
Yeah.
one. She was one of our sisters.
Oh,
So make that 4.
4. But I mean, considering what you all were doing and where you all were located, I mean, that sounds really.
Yeah.
You guys.
Oh, great. I can't muzzle the dog. But we had no idea that we were even going to have that to deal with. We just, the thought of dying over there never occurred to us, or I guess maybe even if we thought about it, we would have thought it would have been the enemy, enemy contact or whatever. But yeah, it wasn't. We'd never thought we'd be killed by our own people, put it that way.
Yeah.
There was also a price on our head to be kidnapped. I mean, to be captured. But the good news with that one is they wanted us captured alive, because we'd be good bargaining power with the president, because if you captured a nurse, that was fair. That was prisoner of war. But to capture Red Cross, that's against the Geneva Convention. So, and stuff. So they really were trying to capture somebody alive so that we'd inflame more riots and stir up more trouble. So we had danger on a lot of different fronts.
So you got your assignment and you went north.
I went north to Ankei, which is in the Central Highlands and up in the mountains, and I was stationed with a 4th Infantry Division.
And did you have a recreation? Were you taking care of a recreation hall?
We didn't have a hall. What's the term is called going forward. we went out every day by either helicopter or any way we could get there. We'd head out to the guys in the field or whatever. Yeah, we didn't have a recreational center.
And where did you live? Where did you sleep at night?
We had a billet with the Red Cross girls and the Special Service girl, and it was fenced in and Constantine wire all around the top and a guard at the front. Um, so I think he was only there towards the nighttime. I don't remember, but yeah, we were guarded. But Jenny's facility had two guards on duty, and they got past both of them and murdered her. So didn't feel real safe just because we had a guard.
Mm-hmm. Did they teach you any like self-defense?
No.
Hmm. So tell me what from, I know that you did, because you didn't stay in that. Sometimes you moved around, right? Like, I mean, you went out to the forces, but like you could change your assignment changed over time, right?
For example, the 4th Division went home.
Uh-huh.
So they were pulling out and they were sending all of their troops back stateside. And we were still there. We were like, hello. Nobody else is. So the Red Cross didn't know what to do with us. And they were thought they'd have to send us home. And I said, I just got here. What do you mean you're sending us home? So they sent us to Da Nang and kind of bunked us in Da Nang until they could figure out what to do with us. So
Mhm.
Da Nang was like being stateside. It had paved roads, it had real buildings, it had we had a place called Freedom Hill, and that was it had a pool table and ping pong tables, and it had air conditioning and a music room and art room, and they had papa's aunts to help clean and keep up with the Kool-Aid, and every once in a while make some cookies or to put out or whatever. But we were there for a month while they tried to figure out what to do with us. Then they split us all up and sent us everywhere. And I was sent to the northernmost, right on the DMZ. They didn't have a unit up there, and they sent 4 of us up to a place called Quang Tri, and it was the northernmost part of Vietnam. And so, I mean, we would go to fire bases where you could see the fence and you could see the North Vietnamese putting the flag up every morning. That's how close we were to North Vietnam. So we were in Quang Tri, and that appeared to be a pretty fortuitous decision because later on, that's where the major base site for one of the large operations called Lam Sam 719. And all of the troops from the south were coming to Quang Tri and just sitting there. They didn't know why. They didn't know what was happening. They didn't know what they were doing there. They stopped the mail because they didn't want any mail going in or out for fear whatever was about to happen would leak. Um, so the mail stopped, which killed everybody's morale.
Hmm.
It was way, way, way overcrowded. In fact, it was so crowded that when a Chinook, the big helicopter, had no place to land, it landed in our backyard. And we had just a hooch with one big open hooch that was sitting on cinder blocks, and it blew us off the cinder blocks. So there went, there it was that crowded, but it was great to be there where we could then head on out to Khe Sanh, which was where the major Lam Sam battle took place, Lam Sam 719.
And so how was the morale of the troops between when you first arrived there and there's kind of like a troop drawdown happening, and then when you're going up there to the most northern part?
Well, different places had different morale because, like in Da Nang, because it was being like stateside, they didn't particularly care about us that much because, they had the officers club with steak and champagne breakfasts and, I mean, they had ice cream, they had flush toilets, some of the places. So it wasn't that big of a deal for them. But boy, when you head up to Quang Tri and there's nothing, nothing. I mean, we're talking mud up to your knees. We're talking outhouses everywhere. We're talking wet, cold, damp. Mold grows on anything that stopped long enough to sit still. Mold grew on it. It depended where you were and what was going on. But they really, especially when they stopped the mail for those 2 weeks, they were just, it was horrible.
So what did you do? 'Cause I've heard that like you guys would go out to the fire bases or where the troops needed a morale boost, and then
Right?
you would bring a hot meal.
We
Were you
could.
were you allowed to do that when the mail was stopped?
Yeah, we could still take that, but most of them didn't. There wasn't enough hot meals, because we had so many extra people coming up that most of them were eating their sea rations and stuff. So by that time, it was pretty much a different war force. It was, it was pretty primitive, pretty different. Everything was different. Where, like you said, depends and varies.
Mhm.
But yeah, so
So
we
how, so
were
what did you do?
there.
Like, oh, sorry.
We did our recreational programs, and sometimes that we could do that, or if they were too busy because they had to fill all new sandbags, we'd hold the sandbag for them while they dumped the mud or clay in it. It's supposed to be sand, but we would just
Mm.
tell them about who had died that day or the day before, or we would just listen, or we would just be there. Sometimes we didn't program. Our programs usually lasted 35, 40 minutes, I guess, and tried to make them laugh. But there were just times when they didn't want to laugh. They wanted to just talk to somebody. So,
Mhm.
and we would try to take presents, the Red Cross back home, various chapters sending presents. They would send bags. They call them ditty bags, and they were really popular. They would be a red cloth bag with a drawstring, and you'd open it up, and there'd be stationery and pens and playing cards, or they loved the garlic powder because it gave their sea rations a little flavor. Just a razor, fresh socks, something like that in those gift bags, ditty bags as they called them. And when everything was out of the ditty bag, they had a bag to put their stuff in, some of their stuff in, little drawstring bags. So sometimes we took food, sometimes we took ditty bags, but every time we tried to what's called program, put on our thing that would make them laugh and forget the war for an hour or so. But it just depends upon what kind of a situation we'd walk into. You never knew what was going to be there
Did
when
you
you
do
landed.
a rotation of the programming?
Oh yeah, we made them. We had to make our own programs, and we would use them in our area until we thought people had seen it, and then we could trade with another group, or keep making more. We were constantly making more of them.
It seemed like you had a picture and it looked like the two men were it almost looked like they were stabbing each other with paper. I don't know
They're
how
all
you
paper airplanes. One of them I sent you, it was Thanksgiving, and they had a turkey sack race, and one guy's got a dart gun, a plastic dart gun, and shooting at stuff. And I remember one of the funniest stories in on K is we were doing a baseball program, and one of the girls there wrote to her mother in Oregon and said, please send us 2 dozen bat balls, which were those paddles that had the rubber band and the little ball at the end of it. And you just see how many times you could hit that rubber ball. Well, her mother sent us 24 of them, and we opened it up, and there was a note that said, don't know what she planned to do with this, but I know it didn't take 4 years of college. So I don't think her mother was real thrilled with her choice of career either. So I know it didn't take 4 years of college to do this. Those little bat ball things, and yeah.
Yeah.
So we always tried to end our program with something funny, like to make them laugh or to make them, and they were really good sports about the whole thing. We could pretty much convince them to try anything silly, and they'd laugh and forget where they were for a while.
Um, did you so how did you come to meet Vice President Key?
Oh, that was in Fubai. We were in Quang Tri and we wanted to go to the Bob Hope show in Fubai, which you'd have to take a caravan of big army trucks, and the Red Cross said absolutely not. That's way too dangerous. The enemy knows it's coming. The enemy's waiting for that caravan. There is no way you're going to the Bob Hope show. And like I said, there were 4 of us. So in our group, and we went. Our big thing when we wanted to do something wrong was, what are they going to do to us? Send us to Vietnam? So we went anyway. And we thought we'd gotten away with it until they put it on TV and they saw us. But anyway, Vice President Key, we were sitting on the platform next to the guy that was holding the cue cards for Bob Hope. So we were front and center. And I don't know why. Well, there were a lot of girls there, but he just came right up to me and asked me, "Where'd you go to college?" And I said, "Oh, I went to college in a small girls' school in Virginia." And he went, "Longwood?" And I thought I was being pranked or something. I said, "How could this man have seen my employment folder or what?" I mean, I was just shocked that he popped right out with Longwood. And I said, "There are people in Virginia that don't even know about Longwood." And he said, "Well, I was just there." And I went, "No, now I really don't believe this is happening." And I said, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, I went to visit a friend that lives near Hampton, Sydney." And he said, "I went to my first football game. I went to the Randolph-Macon Hampton Sydney game. And it was just like somebody had pushed the button." I mean, I was so homesick because it was my first Christmas away from home. And then I remembered all the Hampton, Sydney, Randolph Macon games I'd gone to. And I started the ugly cry, not just crying, but the hiccups, the ugly cry. And that poor man had no idea what he had done. He had no idea how to stop me. He had no idea. He didn't even know what started me, let alone how to stop me. And the Vietnamese never show any physical contact. They don't hold hands. They don't touch. They don't do anything in public. And after about 5 minutes of this heart-wrenching sobs, he walked up to me and he took his index finger and he touched my arm with his index finger and went, "Are you okay?" Do I look okay? No, okay. But yeah, poor man still never figured out what he did wrong or what he did to make me so hysterical. So, but I was homesick,
Mhm.
like homesick, and
So,
didn't fair that I was in his country and he was back playing in my country for a while. So
how was the Bob Hope show?
Bob, that was one of the things I really wanted to do when I was over there. And we were his last show. So he had started south and worked his way to north with was his last show because we were closest to the DMZ. And the guy next to me was on a tower with great big poster size cue cards. Well, he dropped them. Well, Bob Hope had done this show many times, but he flat out refused to continue the show. He just stopped and stood there until this poor guy scrambles down the tower, and we're all helping him pick up all the cue cards. But now they're not in order. So now we're like, "Oh dear, they didn't number them 1, 2, 3 or whatever." So he finally got the cue cards back in order. He gets back on the tower, and we hand him the cue cards again. And then Bob started like nothing had ever happened.
Hmm.
But he didn't ad lib. He just stood there with his arms crossed and like pouting and waiting till the cue cards were back up. And so afterwards, I was talking to him and I said, "Ah, we are so lucky that the monsoon stopped for your show." And he said, "I don't think so." He said, "I think it looks a whole lot better to have the guy sitting in the rain waiting for me." And I stood right there in front of him and I said, "Well, scratch one hero." And he didn't even get it. He didn't even understand what was going on.
Hmm.
So, and he, when he got there, he made the girls move out of their place so he could stay there. I mean, he was not the nice person that he portrayed
Portrayed.
himself to be on camera. So, yeah, not my hero anymore. I liked what he did for the guys. He was a big morale booster for the guys, and I appreciate that and whatever. But yeah,
Hmm.
not my hero anymore.
So then what happened after you returned from your adventure? Like, 'cause the Red Cross told you not to go.
Well, like I said, we got away with it for a long time because they didn't show the Christmas show near Christmas. It was way after Christmas or something. It was a long time later. And then they called and said, "We saw you on TV." And what could they do? I mean, if they fired us, they wouldn't have a unit there. So I think we got something written up in our personnel file or something. I don't know. But again, we our big thing was, what are they going to do to us? I mean, what could be worse than, I mean, what are they going to do to us? So we probably just got something in our file. I don't know. They didn't fire us. That's for sure.
Um, so then how did you celebrate the holidays while you were there? You talked about Thanksgiving and you were there at Bob Hope for Christmas.
Well, that was before Christmas.
Okay.
But we always went out by helicopter on that day and took as many dinners as they could prepare for us. And the sad part is every time we'd land and hand them a turkey dinner, they'd want us to eat with them. And after about the third turkey dinner, I was done. It was like, I'll never eat turkey again. But we would drop off all turkey and all the fixings and try to stay as long as we could before we had to go pick up another one and go somewhere else. But we were constantly taking stuff out to the troops on Christmas Day and Thanksgiving. Any holiday, we were flying out with food as many places as we could.
Did your unit do anything amongst yourselves to kind of mark the holiday?
Well, we did with this. I mean, what can you do? You're stuck in Vietnam, and I mean, what can you do?
Yeah.
Uh, Luckily, my sorority, in fact, from Longwood, sent a Christmas tree. And that was way back. I was probably one of the first artificial Christmas trees in 1970. They weren't many artificial Christmas
Mhm.
trees. They sent me about a 3-foot one with candy canes, but the box had been split open and most of the stuff had fallen out, I guess. But there were some remnants of candy canes and stuff. So we made our own ornaments and at least we had a little tiny Christmas tree. And parents sent a lot of little presents just so we'd have a lot to open. But I remember giving most of mine away to people in the hospital. If they were things like tic-tac-toe boards or, things that could be generic, would be giving them to the guys in the hospital. But yeah, it was nice to hear from the people back home. But I remember the first time I ever got really angry at the people back home is some club adopted us for Christmas and they sent us a present each. And the four of us all got bubble bath. And I went ballistic because at that time, our showers were rainwater when it rained, or every once in a while showers, but usually very cold showers because there was no hot water or anything. So if the sun hadn't heated the water that was on top of the roof, our little trickle of hot water, warm water anyway. And they sent bubble bath, and I went nuts. What do they think we're doing over here, having bubble baths and eating bonbons? And I mean, just no idea of what we were doing and what we needed.
Yeah.
But I mean, you appreciated the thought, but they had no idea.
Yeah.
No
Did
idea.
did you get to go on any R&R breaks while you were there?
Well, I did, yeah. But that was kind of a disaster too, because I told you it was wet and rainy and moldy where I was. So I left Quang Tri in early January, and we had to fly down to Saigon, which took forever because you're begging for people to fly you to this place, and then you beg somebody to fly you to that place, and you're just hopping your way down to Saigon. Had to spend the night in Saigon, and it was a long, very, very long flight to Australia. So by the time I got to Sydney and I got to customs officer, they opened my suitcase and it was solid black mold.
Oh,
Everything in it.
wow.
I couldn't save anything. I mean, I didn't even save the tube of toothpaste because it had been around all the black mold. And so I threw everything away and had to start fresh. In Saigon, new suitcase, new everything, new clothes, just started from, in Sydney. Um, and so when I went back to those same customs officials on the way out of town, out of country, they were so excited to see, what I bought. And they opened the first suitcase, and it was ping pong balls, toilet paper, and light bulbs. And this is not quite what we had in mind. We were waiting for the sexy underwear or something. And they come up with ping pong balls, and yeah. So my first R&R was there, and then the Red Cross lets you take vacation time. So it was so close to Hong Kong. I went to Hong Kong because that wasn't very expensive to fly there. And then I had flown to Bangkok for a couple of days. And the thing that I remember most about Bangkok is when I came back through the R&R center, even though it was a vacation, the R&R center in Saigon, they said, drop your trowel and bend over because you're getting a penicillin shot. And I went, I promise you, I don't need one. And they went, you've been to Bangkok? Penicillin shot. When I don't need one, it's the guys who've been messing around in Bangkok. They need the penicillin shot. And they said, you're getting one anyway. And I went, okay, got my shot, whether I needed it or not. So, yeah. And then on the way home, one of the girls and I stopped in, we could get off the military plane in Japan. So we stopped in Japan for about 2 weeks and then got back on another military plane.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so we got that opportunity.
So you saw most of Asia while you were there.
Well, yeah, I got to see some of what we didn't want to see either. Didn't need to see Laos or Cambodia, and we weren't there. Yeah, supposedly. So anyway, it was quite an adventure.
So wait, do you mean you did work in a unit in Cambodia?
No, we weren't allowed to work in it, but there were times when we ended up not willingly going across the border because that's where the helicopter was going, and we were in a helicopter that was going somewhere we weren't supposed to be. So yeah, we might want to scratch that. That might be getting somebody in trouble.
I feel like I interviewed a soldier that they said the maps were very unreliable.
Yeah, that was it.
So sometimes they would be in Cambodia, but they didn't know they were in Cambodia. So
yeah, all of your identifying patches and name tags and stuff before we accidentally go somewhere. Yeah. So all sorts of crazy things. Crazy war, crazy things. Yeah.
So did you so what did you so you went so you were up in the northern part. Did you stay, was that where you finished your year or did you go
Well,
anywhere else?
I went into hiding for a little while, and I inadvertently broke up a drug ring, and I was supposedly in grave danger because I found this drug ring. And so
Wait,
did a
wait. A drug ring like the US soldier drug ring or like
yeah,
a
yeah. I told you we took food out every day, and we took this food out to a mountaintop. And they said, the cook kept saying out there, said, "Well, I'll serve the guys." And I said, "No, I brought the food. I don't mind serving part of it. I'd like to talk to the guys as they go through." And I had the spinach today. I haven't eaten spinach. Um, and there were little white vials floating in the spinach. And I'm just picking them out and putting them in my left hand and serving them with my right hand. And so the guys aren't talking to me. They aren't looking at me. I'm like, what the heck? This is strange. So here comes the company commander. And he said, "Susan, can I speak to you for a minute?" And I said, "Yeah." And I was looking for some place to put my white vials down. He said, "Bring them with you." And I went, "Okay." And he said, "What have you got there?" And I said, "I don't know, but doesn't it look like those little paint by number? When we were a kid, we get these kits that had all the little paint in different little vials like this." And he looked at me like I must have been the dumbest person ever born on this earth. And he said, I mean, I don't think he thought I was telling the truth. I mean, but I'm holding them. So I'm obviously not hiding them. I'm not, whatever. And so I gave them to him, and he said, "We never could figure out how the guys were getting drugs." And I still didn't get it. And I was going, "What?" And he said, "Well, before we came up to this base camp, we strip searched the guys, and we went through all of their equipment." And I said, "And we bring them out here on top of a mountain, and they're getting high, and we can't figure it out." And I think that's when the light bulb moment hit. And I'm like, "Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh." And he said, "Now we know." And he said, "And now you're in grave danger."
Oh,
And I went, "Oh, okay." So they called the Red Cross and said, "Get her out of here. Get her out of here now." So then, anyway, by the time I left hiding and left Quan Tree, I went down to Quinyon. That was my last station. And we lived with the nurses. But then a couple of months in, the nurses shut down the hospital. So we didn't have any place to go. So again, they thought they were going to be sending us home. And the MACV teammate said that we could move into their compound with them and they would take care of us. And they had tile floors, and they had fans, and they had electricity, and they had flush toilets. And I thought I had died and gone to heaven. I mean, the first week, all I did was flush the toilet and watch it go around. I was like, "Look, it's water's going around." This is what happens after a year of outhouses. And they were right on the beach, and wonderful group of guys. And the nice part about them was they gave us our privacy, where when we were around anybody else, they all flocked to you and wanted to talk to you and stare at you and touch you and whatever. But the MACV guys, really gave us our space, and didn't it gave us our downtime that we needed after being around guys all day. We could come home and actually just be with the girls and not have to entertain or talk to or whatever. So they were a nice group of guys, MACV teammate. And that's where I left from.
hmm.
And I had more. Most of the girls didn't have that many moves, but I had a lot of weird things happen. Shut down this unit temporarily at that unit, that kind of stuff. Move from here, move from there, move. So I mean, I think I had more moves than most of the. Well, I know I had more moves than most of the girls. So yeah.
Was the drug thing unusual?
But when we got there, it seemed to be everybody was a happy drunk. And at night, you could hear people laughing and singing and whatever. And about Christmas time, it started getting quiet, quiet and quieter and quietest. And then so many guys were killing each other because they were on drugs that at one point in time, um, they locked up the guy's guns at midnight, at 6 o'clock at night. And I'm going, hello? When do you think the enemy's coming? Hello? Their guns are locked, in their office. And I'm like, oh, this doesn't feel real good here, people. Yeah, so drugs got to be a pretty big problem.
Hmm. And that was heroin that was in those
I
vials?
To this day, I don't know, but I would have said that's probably what it was because I knew that the enemy would lace marijuana with heroin, and the guys didn't know it. And they would give them the cigarettes to smoke, hoping they would get addicted to heroin, which they did. And I was out on a fire base one time where a guy was having withdrawal symptoms, and that was horrid thing to watch. And they finally took him about halfway down the mountain to a tree and put his arms behind his back and tied him to this tree and had to stick a gag in his mouth and then they were afraid he'd aspirate or something. So they had to take that out. But because he was such brute force and was fighting them so badly. But the problem was the Americans owned the top half of the mountain and the Vietnamese owned the bottom half. I mean, the enemy
Mhm.
first, so they were afraid that he was going to get killed, so they were trying to guard him the best they could. But it was hard. That was not something fun to witness.
Mhm.
So the guys were getting addicted and not even knowing they'd ever had heroin. So I would assume at first I thought it was cocaine. I don't know. I don't know that whatever, but I'll never know, I guess. But I'm pretty sure it was heroin.
Um, so what is I'm trying to regroup. Okay. The enemy forces. You said you saw the enemy forces when you were up in the north putting
Yeah.
up their flag. Did you ever see any other enemy forces in your work?
Well, um, well, I was out on a fire base one time, and this was cocaine. I'm sure it was cocaine. They say they were shooting, the more rockets, and it was walking close. They call it walking them in. They started like pretty far away, then they got closer and closer and closer. And I was taking pictures of it because I figured if I was going to die, at least maybe my camera would survive, and they could see them walking these in. And so I was talking to one of the guys. I said, "Why aren't you shooting back at whoever, wherever they are?" And he said, "We don't have any ammunition." And he had one of those things across his chest that had bullets in it. And I
Mhm.
said, hello, there's some. And he pulled one of the bullets out, pulled the bullet apart, dumped the powder into his hand and sniffed it. So that had to be cocaine.
Oh.
I said, "Oh, good Lord, I'm going to die. His bullets are cocaine." I'm like, "Oh my God, I'm gonna die. Today's the day I'm going to die." But they went right up and over us and went. So I think that they must have just been scaring us because their precision targeting was pretty good. So yeah, that wasn't too good. I've got pictures of that because I knew I'd better be taking pictures of that of the you could see the smoke coming closer and closer. But yeah,
Yeah. Did
yeah.
you was this your what did you do with your money that you earned from this job? Because like it feels
Uh,
like it's different in that you didn't have great but you didn't have living expenses while you were working there. So you're
yeah,
earning this money and
we did because some of the places you had to pay for food.
oh,
They wouldn't charge us if somebody important wasn't around, but if somebody was important, supposedly. I came home $2,000 in debt. So
oh my goodness.
which was big money back then. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I went to Australia, I went to Hong Kong, I went to Bangkok, I went to Japan. So, I really can't complain. We got very little. I think my first monthly check was $97. Yeah, $97 per month.
Hmm. Wow.
And, we had to buy our toiletries. I mean, that was the hardest part, is trying to find feminine supplies. So we used to have that shipped in to us. And we lost a lot of our tennis shoes and underwear because the Mamazons would steal our underwear. Don't know why, but lost a lot of underwear, and our tennis shoes, we would get as tight as we would tie them, could be sucked off in the mud. We'd go down 8 inches in the mud, and by the time somebody pull you out, no matter how tight your tennis shoes were, they weren't on your feet when they got you out. So I lost a lot of tennis shoes, a lot of stuff. And I remember Sears and Roebuck was the only place that would mail to us. We ordered a lot of stuff from Sears.
Hmm.
Yeah, and then family would have to send us personal supplies, shampoos. And I've got a really funny Tampax story. You want to hear a Tampax story?
Yes, I do. I mean, can I ask you just a quick question? I want to hear the Tampax story, but were you a big camper to start on this journey?
Yeah, I guess I had. Yeah, I used to camp with my family. I mean, with the men in my family on a lake in North Carolina in the summer. So, I mean, I did have some of those
Okay.
experiences, but this
Okay.
was camping, and this was definitely roughing it. Yeah.
Okay. So what's the Tampax story?
Well, obviously, we didn't have very many of them because they didn't have stock the PX with feminine things. So whenever we would go to a big PX, it was always buy anything feminine you could find, and somebody will need it or want it. So, and the guys are watching your every minute. I mean, because they hadn't seen a girl, so they just stare at you and follow you everywhere. So, got to one of the big PXs and walked past the aisle and saw one box of Tampax, and I went, okay, goody. But because everybody's watching me, I just kind of push a little bit ahead of it, and I put my hand kind of behind me without looking to grab the box. Inconspicuously, I thought, well, I put my hand on top of a hairy hand. So I jumped and turned around and looked, and it was a soldier, and he was going for the box. And so I said, oh, you take it. He's going, oh, no, you take it. And I'm going, no, you take it. And so we're each trying to give each other, the box of Tampax. And here I was trying not to make a scene. Well, now I've got a scene fighting over this box of Tampax with this guy. But I really wanted him to have it because they really needed them too. Because they would carry one in their helmet. And if you got shot, they would shove it in immediately and it would soak up the blood. It would be like a big Band-Aid.
Yeah, like a compression or
Yeah,
something like it.
that. And then they would also use them. They would dip them in oil and find a thin stick, or if they were lucky, somebody had an old wire coat hanger somewhere, and they would put it on the end of the coat hanger and they would shove it down their barrel of their rifle to oil their rifle with it. So, I mean, I knew why they wanted it, and I knew it must have been important. So I said, no, you take it. And he's going, no, you take it. And I just remember, I think that was one of the most embarrassing moments, because back in those days, you just didn't talk about things like that or have ads on TV about things like that or whatever. That was way too intimate. So that was, I can still turn red thinking about that one.
So did he get the
He
Tampax?
he finally took it. Yes, he knew he wasn't going to win that battle, I guess, but he sure had fun arguing about it, because that meant we were engaged in conversation that much longer. So, he got the one and only box of Tampax.
Do you How did you deal with the male attention? Did you ever have any romantic interests while you were in country
Well,
or
yes, I was engaged when I went over.
Oh, you were?
I was engaged. Yep. And I almost didn't get to go because, like, I think I got engaged during training. And the Red Cross then said, well, you're not eligible to go. And I remember Jenny, my friend that was murdered, she went head on with them. I mean, she went, I was a little Southern belle. I was just going to go, yes, ma'am, I'm going home. And Jenny went, oh, no, 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 no. She is still a single woman. She is not married. So she is going. And so they finally backed down and let me go. And so about 3 months into country, I decided this is not so much fun to be engaged, although all of the married men appreciated it because then they realized that, they left somebody back home and so did I. But after about 3 months, I decided this isn't fair. I'm sending the diamond back. And the guys packed it in a little box, bigger box, bigger box, bigger box, bigger. It was like in 10 different boxes until it was a humongous box because they didn't want it to get lost. So we had a caravan of just truck after truck after truck after truck of people going with me to the post office to make sure that I really did dump somebody back home because they were so used to getting the Dear John letters. They were just thrilled that somebody back home was getting a Dear John letter. So they sent it registered mail so that he would have to sign the card. And so we partied every day waiting for the green card to come back. And he had gotten it. And I was out on a fire base and they called me out on a fire base to say the card was in and the big party was that night. So
Oh.
the big Dear John party happened. So yeah.
Well, how did your fiance feel about you going
Well,
on?
the funny part was he was the one that had told me about Donut Dollies 2 years earlier. He was the one that had already been to Vietnam. And
Oh,
he said that it gave him a reason to get up in the morning. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, otherwise we had nothing to look forward to. He said, we wake up in the morning and go, well, today might be the day you die. And he said, but after the Donut Dollies came the first time, he said we would wake up in the morning and go, today might be the day the Donut Dollies come back. And he said he only saw him twice. And he said, but it gave him a reason to get up in the morning. So, I mean, he knew what I was doing was a worthwhile thing, but he knew everybody was kidding him and saying, you don't seriously think she's coming back to you. And, with thousands of, so I think the ratio was 17,000 to 1. We
wow.
figured out. And, but I mean, how can you date? How can you, I mean, we were so tired. About the first 3 days, it was exciting. After that, it was irritating. And it would be so irritating that if we wanted to go somewhere without being noticed, we put on these great big raincoats pull the hood tight around our face. And the raincoat was long, really long. And we try to go for a walk without anybody bothering us, but they'd see the blue tennis shoes and they go, blue tennis shoes, it's a girl. Warming. And it was exhausting because you couldn't be impolite. You couldn't have a bad day. You couldn't cry about something that had happened. You had to always be a donut dolly. You had to be on. You had to smile all day, come back, get in your bed and cry or something. You could not. Nobody wanted to see a grumpy, sad donut dolly. So we just pretended all day, every day until we got to a place where we didn't have to pretend.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
And I still find myself doing that. I still can go into the donut dolly mode and pretend like everything's okay until I'm alone, and then I'm sad and crying and grumpy.
As long as you get it out sometime, I think
Yeah.
it's okay.
Um,
Did was it amicable when you split with your fiance? Like,
no, he didn't take it real well. No, didn't take it real well. But I had 9 months more of in country for him to think about it before I got home. So, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So but you didn't meet anybody else while you were in Vietnam?
Yeah, I did end up marrying one of the guys that I met in Vietnam. Yeah, but he came home way ahead of me, and we reconnected and stuff. And that was two Vietnam vets in the same house as one Vietnam vet too many. Yeah, so
Mhm.
tough to have to. Although his job was, they call them. Do you know what a REMF is?
Mm-mm.
It's a REMF is an REMF, and it's rear echelon, which means they didn't go out in the field; they stayed back on the base camp. Rear echelon mother something beep. And he was a REMF, and so he sat there in air conditioned office and drank coffee and did something all day. I'm not quite sure what. Where I'm out being shot at, shot down, crashing a helicopter, trouble with a C-130. I mean, I've got the war stories, and I'm,
So you're one of the helicopters you rode in crashed?
and I was so excited. Oh my gosh, I was so excited because in Vietnam, a status symbol was a bracelet called a tail rotor chain. And a tail rotor is the back helicopter rotor, the blade that goes around, not the one on top, but the one at the back. And if you crash and you survive, you can take the tail rotor chain off and make bracelets out of it. And that's a real status symbol. So I was so excited that I had earned. So here we are in enemy territory, and I'm yelling, "Get the rotor chain, get the chain." And the guys are going, "What?" They thought I was going to be hysterical. And I'm just going, "Get the tail rotor chain." So they did. They got my tail rotor chain, and we all got bracelets out of it.
And
But one of the dumbest, and this shows I must have been in shock, because somewhere between way up there and crashing, I realized that my wig flew off my head. And I was pissed. Now I'm really mad because I only had one. It was specially made for me in Hong Kong because we didn't have a lot of water to wash our hair, so the wig helped. And because we were in helicopters all the time, when helicopters land, they sandblast you. Rocks and sand and dust and dirt, just, it hurts. It hurts. It's the power of it. The blade blowing that at you hurts. And like at night, you could come back and be picking little tiny stones out of your scalp because it was like embedded, and cleaning your ears out of all the little pebbles and stuff. So when you had a wig, all you had to do was take it off, hit it with a broomstick a couple of times, and all of the rocks fell out and stuff. So anyway, I was not real happy I lost my wig. So they said, we must be in enemy territory. I mean, we're in enemy territory, but they'll be here in a half an hour. So just stay calm. And I wasn't upset to begin with. I was excited and obviously in shock. And I said, well, got a half an hour. I'm going to go find a wig. And they went, what? I said, I'm going to go find my wig. And they went, what? And so I said, no problem, you guys. I'm fine. I can do this. Well, the poor little door gunner sitting behind me, he's the guy with the gun. He went, oh my gosh. So I take off, heading out in the middle of enemy territory. What was I? In a blue dress and tennis shoes. I'm like, shoot me. So I'm just wandering through the
jungle.
no, it was rice paddies.
Right, Patty.
Because I remember leeches. There were leeches getting on my legs, and I hate leeches, so that wasn't fun. So I finally decided and this poor little guy's trudging along behind me. So I finally decided either I came out of shock or wised up or something. So I went back and waited, and I don't even remember the rest of that story. So I managed to forget that part of the story for about quite a few years. And I went to reunion in Orlando, Florida. And I said, gee, I'll just go in and thank these guys for taking such good care of us when we were in Vietnam, because they were helicopter pilots and the crew members and the door gunners and whatever. And I said, I'll just go thank them and whatever. Walked in the front door. This man was coming towards the front door of the hotel. He stopped dead in his tracks and pointed to me and went, wig. And I went, oh crap. And so I pulled my hair out and I went, nope, nope, it's my hair, real hair. And he went, oh no, lady. He called me lady. He said, I will never forget you. He said, I have had nightmares about you for 37 years. He said, stay right there. He said, my wife's heard this story a million times. She's got to meet you. We were sitting in the hospitality room and he was telling the story about him being an 18-year-old, scared, silly. The helicopter crashes. He's scared, silly, but I'm thinking it's fun. Get the tail rotor checked. So, and all of a sudden he takes off, he said. And I said, he thought to himself, he said, Self, if you let that woman get killed, they will kill you when you get back to base camp for letting a donut dolly get hurt. He said, so I'm dead if I let her get hurt. He said, but if I go with her, we're standing targets in enemy territory. He said, so they're going to kill you out there. And he said, thought about it for a few seconds. And he said, I figured I was dead either way. So at least if I got killed by the enemy, my wife would get a medal. He said, I went with you. But he said he'd had nightmares about me for 37 years. And I went, sorry. And so one of the guys that was listening to the story, he popped up with, can you imagine what the farmer felt that found your wig? Because they wouldn't know a wig. They wouldn't know what a wig was, out in rural Vietnam. They didn't know what a wig was. They're probably still trying to figure out what animal shed that thing. He said, I've had nightmares about you for 37 years. And I have blonde hair. I had dark brown hair then. He said, oh no. Oh, no. I'll never forget you. I went, well, I obviously forgot you, but yeah.
It was the trauma of the event.
The story. That was about the dumbest thing I think I did there the whole time.
Was the helicopter shot down by enemy fire?
I have no idea. I don't know. I don't know when it was. I don't know where it was. And I think I would have thought, maybe I thought it up. I dreamed it up if I didn't have the bracelet and hadn't met this man 37 years later. I might have just not ever remembered any of it. But no, don't remember. I spent so long trying to forget Vietnam that, when I did start remembering it, it comes in bits and pieces. And like I said, I would definitely have forgotten that I went out looking for my wig if he hadn't have reminded me. I would have liked to have forgotten that one my whole life. But yeah.
I think things come back to us as we can deal with them,
Yeah.
When you have the space and the capacity to kind of process it, then it comes back.
A lot of holes, because I was trying to use my letters as my diary, but after I sent home part of my roof that was blown off and kind of all crinkled up and stuff, my parents were so upset that they called my brother in Germany. And my brother in Germany wrote me the ugly letter going, I don't know what's wrong with you, but do not send mom and dad any more of your war trophies, or whatever. So I sanitized everything from then on. I didn't tell them anything from then on.
When did you lose was the roof when the helicopters were landing, or when?
No, that was part of, when incoming, got part of one of my roof, and it just kind of took the tin and turned it into shroud, And anytime I found something, I just had a big box in the corner and I'd throw stuff that the guys gave me or throw stuff. I thought that was pretty cool. And throw stuff in there. And when it was full, I'd tape it up and just send it home. And I guess mom and dad found it and didn't think that was so cool. or something. So, but I remember my brother, woo, he gave me, he was not very nice. Don't you do this to mom and dad. They're having a bad enough time without seeing what used to be part of your roof. So, no more of those, that stuff went on. So, and no more stories. I didn't tell them any more stories after that.
Hmm.
Sad because I really would have liked to have had I wish I'd kept a diary, but there was so little time and so little paper. I mean, I'd be writing on the back of a bag or on any just scraps of stuff. I mean, it was amazing the stuff that, I would find to write on because I didn't always have paper. Didn't always have, I mean, I'd be writing on the back of a Sears catalog around the pictures and, what we weren't using for toilet paper, I'd write letters on. And, so I didn't keep a diary. So.
Did you and your brother have any kind of understanding? I mean, I know he wasn't in Vietnam, but he was in the military. Did he have
Oh, he thought it was horrible. He thought it was the dumbest thing I'd ever done, and I'd done a lot of dumb things in my life, so he thought that was really crazy. And what changed his mind was he was dating a model before he went to Germany, and he was telling her his stupid sister this, that, whatever, whatever, and she said, "I want you to know that I applied for the job and I didn't get it." And he looked at this gorgeous, sane model that he was dating and went, "Wait a minute. They took my sister and they didn't take you?" And then he changed his tune a little bit. It was more like he thought they'd take any idiot to walk through the front door. And after talking to her, he realized they wouldn't. And after talking to her, he realized that more people thought this was a good idea than he thought. So, he changed a little bit there, but I think he was jealous that I went to Vietnam and he was drinking beer and buying a Mercedes and touring Europe on his, 4 years in the army.
mm,
So I
yeah.
think he was a little envious that I had the war stories and he had the beer house stories.
So, did you ever how was your interactions with the local people, the Mamazons and
We didn't see local people except Mamazon. They had to have, because we weren't allowed to go into town. We weren't allowed to be around because you never knew who the enemy was. And it ended up that our very first Mamazon was the enemy. She had been smuggling pieces to make a bomb, and it had to be upper private parts because they searched them when they came on base. So her name was Bay, Bai, beautiful girl, super intelligent. She spoke English fluently. Um, and they called us one day and said, "Where's Bay? She didn't check out. You had to be off post by 5." And I said, "Well, she left in plenty of time, to be off post." And they said, "Well, we can't find her." And she had smuggled in enough parts to build a bomb. And she went over to the general's hooch and set the bomb off. And um, hoping to kill him, destroy the hooch and whatever. And something went wrong and it destroyed part of it, but it killed her.
hmm,
So, I mean, this was somebody that we knew and loved. I mean, she was such a sweetheart, and we were doing everything we could to help her life be better and teaching her things and helping her with things and giving her extra money if we could. There was a limit and stuff. And she was the enemy.
hmm.
So,
So
trust
after
issues, a little few trust issues there. So, yeah.
so after that, how did you react to the local people who worked for your group?
I was very distant. I didn't trust, I never became friends with any of them again. And I always had one eye open. That was for sure. Yeah. Kind of scary.
Did you when you were over, did you hear about things like the Kent State shootings and the Winter Soldier, you know,
Um, the
investigations?
propaganda would come on. Oh, what did Hanoi Hannah would come on and broadcast stuff like that to try to make our morale bad. Yeah. Yeah. We heard about stuff like that, but we were usually much, much, much later in hearing about stuff like that. It was funny. We decided, somebody told us that we would get the Super Bowl. So I decided to have a big Super Bowl party for everybody. And we were actually going to get the Super Bowl to watch and never stopped to think about any of this. So the guys wanted to make bets and they all gave me like 100-1 odds. And I went, are you kidding me? Well, I didn't realize the thing had been taped 2 weeks earlier and everybody already knew who won. Okay, guys, all right. Because we didn't get anything live time. We got it later time. So
Mm-hmm. So when you left Vietnam, what did you do? Other than going to Japan for 2 weeks, what was your plan for your life?
well, I came home and tried to, get back to normal, which never happens. I've been home 50 some years and it hadn't happened yet. And I knew I'd be a teacher. But I got married. I got home in August and got married in November.
So it's August of 71.
Uh-huh. My husband was a football coach at University of New Hampshire. So I went up there for a couple of weeks after the honeymoon, and we couldn't settle in because we knew that the head coach at University of New Hampshire was going to William and Mary and back in Virginia. Well, you know that, duh. So he had 14 coaches and he could only take 7. And we didn't know whether my husband was going to be one of the lucky 7 or whether he was going to get fired.
Mm.
So we just kind of stayed in a suite in a hotel until the announcement came out that he was being taken to William and Mary.
Oh.
So we moved to William and Mary and I started teaching.
And did you and your husband stay married?
21 years. 21 years. When I was fed up, we were living in Hawaii at the time, and I was going through my PTSD. I was going through the Desert Shield, Desert Storm, which was a rough time to start my PTSD because I was dealing not only with my war, but the war that was going on then. And I decided I was going home. I'd been in Hawaii long enough and had enough problems in Hawaii with him. And I was going home and he could either come or stay. And he stayed. I brought the kids and came to Florida. Never been to Florida, didn't have a job, didn't know anybody. But I knew after living in Hawaii and I couldn't go anywhere that had winters.
Mm-hmm.
I was definitely a tropical person by that time. I was a barbecue flip-flops person. They didn't wear flip-flops all the time and they didn't barbecue. I mean, your big meals are barbecue, out on the grill. I didn't want to go. So ended up in a totally strange, never been here. Just, I'm going to Florida.
And you've made your home there ever since.
Yeah. And it was funny because I didn't even realize it at the time, but I kept in touch with one of my generals. And I moved to, at that time, Safety Harbor, Florida. And he picked up on it. He said, it's no surprise that after everything you went through in Vietnam, that you would pick a Safety Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
I went, oh, yeah, I live in Safety Harbor. Yeah. So it was strange that the general picked up on that first.
It seems like the Donut Dollies have such a networked community, not only amongst yourselves, but within the military, the Vietnam veteran community. So I was wondering, did you find support for?
I did not tell a living soul that I had been in Vietnam Because we moved. Nobody in New Hampshire knew. Nobody in Williamsburg knew. Nobody, every place I moved didn't have somebody to tattle that I'd been in Vietnam. So I didn't mention it for 19 years. Stuffed it and didn't mention it. And I remember we were playing tennis one day in Hawaii at the club. And I told my dear, dear friends, I said, I'm going to DC next week. And they went, what in the world are you going to Washington for? I said, Vietnam reunion. And they said, what? Why would you go to a Vietnam reunion? I said, because I was in Vietnam. And they had no idea. These have been my best friends for years, and they had no idea. Never mentioned it, never talked about it. Went to that first reunion in 1990. Luckily, it was the last day, I think, when I fell apart, and I started crying, and I cried for weeks and weeks. Put me back on the plane crying, got to Hawaii crying. I mean, it was finally, they opened Pandora's box, and it was just gushing forth. Went to the vet center and said, I'm a Vietnam vet and I need help. And they said, you're not a vet, and we can't help you. Went, oh, all righty then. I said, when that rocket was heading my way, it didn't say don't hit her. She's not a vet. And when the plane crashed, it didn't, a helicopter crashed, it didn't say let the civilian off first and then we'll crash. I said, I went on it. But anyway, I was so upset about that as I was heading out to the car, the counselor came out and said, did you marry a Vietnam vet? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, we can treat you as the wife of a Vietnam vet. Wrong answer. That poor man still remembers that moment. Wrong answer. He wasn't in the military, so he didn't know what a RIMP was. So I married a RIMP. He's had an air conditioned office, drank coffee all day while I was out being shot down. And I listed the 5 million things that had happened to me while I was there. And that poor man's backing back into the building, like, oh my gosh, I've got a postal donut dolly on my hands. But he ended up being a lifesaver. In fact, he even came to Florida years later with his family to visit. So, yeah, he was. And my PTSD got so much worse still because of the war and everything hitting all at once. And I actually went back to Vietnam in 1998. I said, I got some demons I got to face. I said, it's going to kill me or cure me, and I'm not sure which. I said, I could come home in a straitjacket, but that's better than being on that fence. It's going to knock me off one way or the other. It's either going to fix it or coming home in a straitjacket.
So how did it go?
It was very cathartic. It was very healing. Very healing. Like the fact that we used to call it life altering. Yeah. And so many Vietnam vets say, I didn't leave anything over there. And I said, well, I think I left my sanity over there. I'm going to go see if I can find some peace. And it worked. It was very, very helpful.
Did you go with a group or did you go?
Yeah, I did. I went with 101st Airborne, which is the first. They're the what I call the people who pull me out of the closet. Because like I said, for 19 years, I never talked about Vietnam. And I got that letter from the general of the 101st inviting me to their reunion in DC. And that's what pulled me out of my hiding. And so I went back with them, with a dozen of them. And we went all over the country and had all sorts of. I got to have a memorial service for Jenny, and it was the first day we were there, so I really didn't know anybody. But the fact that I sobbed as much as I did made it okay for the guys when they had theirs to sob too. So set the tone of the 2 weeks that we had some healing we needed to do, and you can do this in front of us and with us. And so it was, we were like brothers and a sister by the time we came home. Yeah, very, very amazing trip. A lot of healing went on during that trip.
Yeah.
Funny part about it is our guide was a colonel, and he had gone to West Point and he was in Vietnam, and he could not understand PTSD. Didn't understand it, didn't know what it was, didn't have it, didn't no sympathy whatsoever for those of us who were falling apart, even the other guys. By the time the trip was over, we had him convinced he had it. We told him if he was going to be a tour guide for these trips, that he'd better develop some empathy here along the way. And by the time he realized he had PTSD and he was crying, uh, he came back a better person, too. So, but we had to convince him he had it.
Oh.
Yeah, nobody survives Vietnam without some sort of PTSD. Even the ramps, because they still had to dodge rockets and
Well, and I think that some of them have like your brother, you know what I mean? Like they have that kind of remorse or regret that they didn't go and face what you faced. Um, and
yeah.
were they cheating something, you know?
In fact, I've been in contact recently with one of the guys who was a driver for Donut Dollies, and he's having really bad remorse. He feels like he didn't have a war. All he did was drive the Donut Dollies from here to there to here to there to whatever, and he's feeling very unmanly, because he didn't use his gun, he didn't use his rifle, he didn't fight a war, he drove girls around all the time. And this is 52 years later, I guess, and he's still feeling it.
Yeah. But I mean, he served.
Well, you try telling him that, because I tried.
Yeah.
He wants to go do it again and use a gun instead of, because see, we weren't allowed to drive anywhere, so we had to be driven everywhere. So we had to have a driver. And he was the one that drove Lucinda to the hospital. She was one of the girls that died in 71 probably. And he drove Lucinda to the hospital the day she died. So, he's got some stuff too. And, he was there. He saw some of the girls get fired. He saw some of the girls quit. He saw some of the girls, he's got his stories too. So he knows probably more about Donut Dollies than I do, because he was with them all day, every day for a year.
So what happened to Lucinda?
Um, we were told, and I was in the hospital at the time with severe something, and they didn't know what it was. And somehow they were talking to her doctor, and she had severe whatevers. And then she died. So, of course, I thought I was next, because I thought we both had the same whatever. But I found out they actually told us at the time it was classified as an unknown jungle disease. But if you go on now and do research, they've listed a disease as Guillain-Barré or whatever it is, Guillain-Barré, Gillenbarre, whatever. Yeah, that one. That's what they're saying, and it does. After you research that disease, it doesn't make a lot of sense for a young woman to die of it and die that fast. But there were a lot of cover-ups in Vietnam. A lot of cover-ups. So.
So you came back and you started your life with your husband. How did you feel when Saigon fell in 1975?
It was depressing, very, very depressing. Like, what did we do this for? Look at all these people who died for whatever. Wondered what happened to, some of them, I'm sure, stayed in country and went AWOL and, stayed and married their mamas on, or worried about the dogs, because I knew they couldn't bring the dogs home. There are lots and lots of dogs, the scout dogs, the tracker dogs, those dogs, not just on the street dogs, but the trained military dogs and their handlers, and the handlers wanted to bring them home and they couldn't bring them home. What was going to happen to all these trained dogs and stuff. And just a lot of weird things, and tried not to pay too much attention to it because by that time Vietnam was tucked away in a closet, and tried not to think about it, tried not to anything.
You're keeping your cool at that point. You're just trying to move on.
Box is what I was trying to do. Just keep that lid on the Pandora's box. Keep it all in there. Yeah.
What did you think about the subsequent, like, did you have trouble with Iraq and Afghanistan, and how we had to leave those conflicts?
Knew exactly how they felt. Knew exactly what they felt like. Yeah. Same thing all over again. They say history repeats itself.
Yeah.
Didn't learn.
So the only way you were treated was through your husband's benefits.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Then I did a lot of, I spent a lot of my own money on it. And I think the thing that helped me, besides going back to Vietnam, the thing that helped me the most was the rapid eye movement therapy. That was quite successful very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Very quickly.
And that's when they guide you through, they put you back in a situation, right? Or some, and
well, it makes sense to me. And I remember the doctor explained to me that, when we have an event, part of it is the event and part of it is your feelings. And when they go into your brain, they separate. This goes to the factual part. This goes to the emotional part. And when you've been traumatized, they don't separate, so that you can bring up that fact and that emotion comes with it. And the whole rapid eye movement helps your brain put the fact, like I can tell you now, somebody tried to kill me and I don't have a panic attack, where before, if I heard the song that was playing while this was happening, I would have a full-blown panic attack. I could be in the middle of the grocery store staring at my grocery list, and you don't even realize that the grocery store pipes in music until you go into a panic attack. And then I used to always look up, like, where's the speaker? Where's this coming from? And it took me years to even figure out that's what was causing it. And even when I figured out what caused it, I couldn't stop it. But at least I knew why I was acting crazy and vomiting and shaking and sweating and, a real full-fledged panic attack. And within an hour of the rapid eye movement, I was okay. I'll still hear the song. Like if we're in a restaurant, crowded restaurant, and everybody's laughing and talking, I'll perk up and go, there's the song, where I didn't even know, again, they were playing music. Luckily, they don't play it as much anymore. But I don't make a fool out of myself like I used to. So.
Why not? I don't know what you expect someone, people shouldn't expect someone to just brush that under,
Well, you don't want to explain it to everybody either. Oh, don't mind me. I was somebody, you don't want to go through all of that in the middle of the grocery store and everybody's looking at you. Are you okay? Are you okay? And you can't even talk,
Mm.
Yeah, you don't want to have to explain it to everybody. Yeah. But if anybody ever hears this or listens to this and they learn nothing else but rapid eye movement for any trauma, if you've been in a fire, a bad wreck, trouble as a kid, get rapid eye movement therapy. It's amazing. So that's when I go to these reunions, that's what I usually try to talk to them about. Please go get help. This is quick. This is easy. This isn't painful to do. Just do it.
And it's not chemically.
No, nothing at all. Just quick and easy. Quick and easy.
So, I mean, how would you say the Donut Dolly program affected your life and where it went and what you decided to do?
Um, how did it affect my life? Well, we call it, there was a season one and now there's a season two because you never ever possibly be the same person. And I distinctly remember standing this incident that happened at Vietnam that I won't go into, but I remember standing there going, you'll never be the same person. Nobody could ever be the same person after just witnessing and going through. So you've changed. You will never be the same person. And that life as you knew it is over. Because it was. Where'd you go? Where'd I go? Hi, you.
No, I'm trying to get you back in the primary.
But that's okay.
It's
But
a bad moment.
we knew me. I mean, I knew immediately that this was life altering. Some of the girls didn't, the ones that stayed in the rec room and played pool and ping pong, Vietnam was fun, no big deal, nothing. Some of us it's the same thing with the guys. Some of them stayed back and drank coffee. Some of them were out being shot at, shot down, it just depends upon what you did. But I knew I'd never be the same person. And it's with you all day, every day. Even though it was 52 years ago, your subconscious has no timeline. To us, it was a nanosecond ago. And I loved it. One of the guys wrote an article for our magazine that said, were you ever in Vietnam? And he answered, yes, I was just there last night. And, the sights, sounds, smells, thoughts, people that you knew that you kept in contact with or whatever. Yeah, it's with you all the time. All the time. And it was so funny because my friends in Florida didn't know that I was in Vietnam for a long time, wouldn't talk. And then when they found out, I wouldn't talk about it. And then a switch flipped, and now I won't stop talking about it. Now they wish they didn't know. Oh, yeah, no. So, yeah.
So,
Yeah, we're very active in trying to get the Congressional Gold Medal for the girls. So I'm very, very active with that. I'm writing a book right now about it. Going to lots of reunions. They have to hear about going to Reno for this reunion. I leave tomorrow for Jacksonville for another reunion. I just finished a reunion last week in Tampa. The most amazing people in my life are people that were in the military, not necessarily when I was there, but I've met them at a reunion and, they're just amazing people. And so are their families. So, he's a good part of my life now are the friends and experiences that I've had because of Vietnam. But the bad parts, my health problems. I was highly exposed to Agent Orange and I'm paying the price for it. And the fact that the VA has taken responsibility for the fact that Agent Orange can mess up the next 7 generations of my family. Be 5. Now they've changed at the last town meeting I went to, they've admitted 7 generations.
wow.
So I'm paying a heavy price for the mental health and the physical health because of it.
What is your book about?
Well, it was supposed to be about Jenny's murder, but the co-author changed his mind about halfway through it, and it's going to be about all Donut Dollies and the Donut Dolly program. He's doing all the work. He's written 14 books, so I talk a lot and he writes a lot. So, yeah, he's done a lot of research. He's been working on it 2 years now, and it looks we're going to actually finish this thing, and he's already got 4 publishers interested. So the story needs to be told before we die.
Yeah.
And Jenny's story has never been told because her murderer never went to trial. So there are people to this day that are contacting me trying to find out what happened, because I seem to be the only person that knows what happened. So, because it took me 30 some years, 38, 39, anyway, to find the murderer. And then he was about to be released. So I flew immediately to Wisconsin to interview him to find out, why did you murder this woman? And then he's been a terror in my life ever since. That was not one of my smarter moves either. So, yeah, I put myself on his radar, and he gets in and out all the time. He went back because the Army did nothing about him. He went back and murdered somebody else. And so I was looking in prisons, and I even was a director of the women's prison in Hawaii, the educational director, so that I had access to prison records and couldn't find him. But he was in a psych hospital because he was, for the second time, considered legally insane and could not stand trial, which is what happened with Jenny. Therefore, there was no
Record.
money. So, and then he went back and murdered his best friend and went to the psych hospital, but they were letting him out. So I flew up to meet him before he was let out.
And he's free now?
He's been in and out 3 times, I think, since then. And he's out now. He's in Milwaukee. But this time he has an ankle bracelet. He never had an ankle bracelet before. And in fact, one time the sheriff of Dodge County called and said, we've got a mutual friend that, due to confidentiality, I can't mention his name, but he's out, and I understand he's coming to see you. He said, I've talked to your sheriff in your town. I've sent pictures. I've told them if they get a phone call from your number, this is what they need to expect. And I said, well, if you want that to scare me, it did. And he said, yeah, and you need a good alarm system, and everybody in your family needs concealed gun permits. So we did. We all got concealed gun permits and a really good alarm system, and lived in constant fear until he was arrested again.
Wow.
So, but I had to meet him, and I had to find out if he was really the one that did it. He might not have even been the one that did it. And that's why I had to go. The guy that found him was just going to go interview him. And I said, you wouldn't know if he was telling a lie. I would know if he's telling a lie. I have to go. So, yeah.
So did you get the answers you wanted?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now I'm trying to spread them I get phone calls all the time from people who knew her 52 years ago and want the answers. And that's why I said, God, would somebody write a book so I don't have to keep telling everybody individually? I got a email from her niece going, tell me about my aunt. Nobody in my family will discuss her. So everybody wants to know. People that dated her in high school and college, people she babysat for have contacted me. People on the football team where she was a cheerleader in college. I've had people I had one man who didn't even know her, but he was in Vietnam. He drove 3 hours to her hometown to talk to the Red Cross director to find out the story. And then 3 hours back home. So 6 hours round trip to talk to the director of the Red Cross to try to find out what happened to her. And when they were tearing down that building, the Red Cross building in Brooksfield, Ohio, they had a huge picture of her on their wall. They called him. He drove another 6 hours, 3 hours and 3 hours to pick up the picture of her. He'd never met her. This is how impacted he was by her murder. He and his wife drove that picture to me in Florida from Ohio. And then when they ended up doing a highway in her name in Brooksville, they named a highway after her. I sent the picture back from Brooksville, Ohio, and now they've reframed it and put it in their historical museum or something. But all of that just because that story meant that much to him.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people. I had one guy who said when we were doing the In Memory of in DC, he said, I'm going in for open heart surgery, and if I live, I'll be there. If I don't live, my wife and my son will be there. And I'm like, okay. And he was. I saw him walking across the field. I'd never met the man, but he came out in the pouring down rain after heart surgery and to honor her. So, I mean, she just made an impact in everybody's life.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, it's hard to lose someone that young with so much potential.
Well, somebody who's trying to help you and gets murdered because of it is really if she died in she died in war, it wouldn't have been, I don't think, quite so bad. But to go help soldiers and have a soldier murder you was, that- that's
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Well, is there anything that you wish that I had asked you about that I haven't asked you about?
golly, I don't think we left much uncovered, did we? No.
I think there's probably more. There's more, but I think we covered a lot.
Um, Yep. I mean, I think the biggest thing is the impact on the girls after they came home. That is really, I'm making the author put a chapter in there about that because people just think, okay, it was a year, you're back home, and now you're whatever, but you're never ever the same person, ever, ever. And they took girls that were popular and cheerleaders and class presidents and vivacious and this and that, and they made us weird. And so we're now the square peg in the round world. And you never, ever fit in anywhere again. Because when I'm with all of my girlfriends, they're thinking about shopping, manicures, lunch, whatever. I'm thinking about death, dying, reunion. That's my sunroofs, my skylights you're hearing in the rain. Sorry, can't control that. But anyway, you're just never ever the same. And then when you go to the Vietnam reunions, it's so much fun to be around the guys, but you're still the girl at the guys' reunion. I mean, yeah, you've got Vietnam in common, and yes, you've got, they all want to confess everything to you because you were there and this and that, but you're still the girl and they're
Yeah.
still the guys. So there's really no place where I actually fit in. And I mean, the way I used to, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do have a funny story about that.
Okay.
You can cut it if you want to, but I was working at Chichi Rodriguez's golf course. He has a school for children, troubled children, and I specialized in working with troubled, adults or children. I taught in prisons and psych wards, and anyway, I went over to the pro shop, and there was Alice Cooper. And my friends had given me a big party when I came home from Vietnam, and they said, loud music, everything going. And somebody said, well, what do you think of Alice Cooper? And I said, I don't believe I've met her yet. And it was one of those E.H. Hutton moments where everything came to complete and total silence. And they just kind of looked at me like, okay. And so when I saw him in the clubhouse, I walked up to him and I said, I just want you to know that it's your fault. My friends think I'm weird. Well, that alone makes him think, well, they were probably right because most people don't start out a conversation like that. And I told him, Vietnam, just got back, whatever, didn't know who he was. And so we were chatting and he was very personable, very nice. And we were coming out of the door to the pro shop, and I taught in a portable because it was his golf course, and he just put portables out in the golf course, and kids went to school there. So I looked up, and there were 17 kids standing next to my portable, holding their lunch. And I went, oh my gosh, I'm not going to win the Teacher of the Year award. I forgot that the kids wanted to have lunch with me today. And he went, what? He said, they wanted to have lunch with you. It's not detention. And I said, no. I said, they like to have lunch with me. And I said, but obviously, I said, I feel horrible. I made them stand out here holding their lunch tray because they can't go in the room if I'm not there. And I said, and I'm talking to you. And he said, I'm the one who wrote School is Out for Summer. He said, I can't believe they're giving up their lunch hour to be in school with the teacher. And so, but anyway, I finally got to tell Alice Cooper it was his fault. My friends thought I was weird when I came home. So, yeah.
That
But
must
he
have,
gave us a lot of stuff for our auction, and we raised thousands of dollars worth of the autograph stuff he gave us. So, yeah. Worked out well anyway.
yeah. The connection brought it all together.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, the rain's getting bad, so I know it's going to be trouble hearing anyway. So if you
well,
think of anything else, we'll just call with those questions and we'll try it again.
yeah. And thank you so much for giving your time
Well,
and
it's a story that needs to be told, Nobody's heard. I mean, even guys in Vietnam didn't know. There are plenty of guys that didn't know about us because, like I said, one for every 17,000. So, they never really, we couldn't be everywhere. We couldn't see everybody. So there were people in Vietnam that never even knew what a donut was. So I'm glad our story's being told.
yeah.
Thank you for doing that.
Well, I appreciate just well you sharing it because it's not easy, but and like it's hard not to be the jovial person all the time and remember the difficult things, but it's important to document them.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, thank you for what you're doing. And like I said, if you have any questions or you can think of any other type of pictures, I mean, I have a DVD that's full of all whatever, but I haven't taken off of it or whatever. But anyway, if there's anything else you really think is missing, let me know and I'll see what I can do to help you. And I can try to find you more Vietnam. I guess you don't need any more dollars, or I'd find more from Virginia, but.
Oh, if you know of any more from Virginia, let me know.
Okay, well, I'll start going through my book and see what I can find.
That would be lovely.
Okay, they're having a reunion in September, so maybe I'll tell them about it or so. Anyway, thank you,
Thank
and
you.
you have a good rest of the day. And thanks for being so flexible with my broken, yeah. Right.
Well, thank you, and I'll be in touch soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay, bye.